Okay, it should be recording.
Okay.
So I've been thinking a bunch about the tenfold way. And so I've been spending some time writing about stuff just to organize my thoughts and present a certain mystery.
A mystery that you haven't really presented yet to me?
Certainly haven't presented it to you, yeah.
Okay.
And it takes a while to present it, which is why I had to write all this stuff.
Sure.
So let's see. Well, okay. So it's hard to even know how to start, but I think I'll start by presenting the mystery without even explaining what it is.
Okay.
So
we'll try that.
So there are ways of getting symmetric spaces from Clifford algebras. And
well, I've certainly thought about stuff like that. Go ahead. I may not know what anybody else has done about that, but I have thought about something like that. Are you still connected?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a video glitch.
Well, I think I'm straining my poor little system's brain here.
Okay.
Or something. I'm going to turn off my own face here. So
okay.
Yeah. So any thoughts would be helpful, but maybe give me a little while to present this thing. So Bott periodicity is this eightfold periodicity, and one way that people think about it is that you have these 8 spaces which are infinite loop spaces. So like O here means O infinity, and U means U infinity, and SP means SP infinity, and that's like the infinite limit of the compact symplectic groups. So those are like the unitary, those are the quaternion versions of unitary groups.
Yeah, so we got these. Why some of these are infinite loop spaces rather than just loop spaces, but keep going. Yes.
Yeah, well,
it may be conceptually obvious that they all are, but go ahead. Yes.
Well, it's not obvious necessarily that they all are, but we start with one of them, like O infinity, and then we keep taking its loop space, and we get spaces that are homotopy equivalent to these ones going down the line here.
Okay, right. Okay, I was being silly, right? As soon as you have one infinite loop space, you have a whole bunch of other.
Yeah. I mean, so the non-obvious part is like, why are they that? Why do they work out to be this? So if I just handed you SP mod U, you might not know it was an infinite loop space.
Yeah.
So this thing keeps cycling around. And there's a lot to say about like why this works out the way it does. And they're very connected to Clifford algebras in a very nice way, which basically Milnor explains in his book on Morse theory, in which I've been trying to understand and which I could explain. But then there's like another way that I know of getting symmetric spaces from Clifford algebras that sounds pretty different. And I haven't explained that to you yet either. That's probably easier to explain. And it gives you associated, so each one of these is associated to some Clifford algebra. Here I'm associating the same Clifford algebra to each number 0 through 7, but using a different trick for turning it into a symmetric space, or there's like an infinite dimensional limit of symmetric spaces.
All right, let me see if I'm following along. Okay, so this is a little table here with equivalence signs in it, and those equivalent signs in it are trying to.
Those are actually what?
They're not propaganda. Those are actual statements.
Yeah, those are statements. So these are like homeomorphisms of spaces, or really like diffeomorphisms of infinite dimensional manifolds or something like that.
Okay, so the right-hand column of equivalences, that's those omega things, those are the loop spaces.
Yeah, those are the loop spaces.
And then there are these other nice homogeneous spaces, finite dimensional homogeneous spaces. And you are asserting that they are actually homotopy equivalent. On the right hand
These are
side,
these are infinite dimensional homogeneous spaces. This is like O
infinite
infinity.
dimensional homogeneous spaces. Okay, okay, okay.
But the way we
but they're just these, whatever you call them,
they're direct limits of finite
limits or
dimensional
directed
ones.
co-limits, yes,
Yeah,
of these finite dimensional things.
yeah. And so I made what
In some cases, I might have to think about exactly how that direct limit goes, but okay, but go ahead, yes?
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the finite dimensional ones, and those are symmetric spaces in the traditional sense, and they depend on a number like ON or something like that, and
Right.
and so this is just sort of the n goes to infinity limit of those, and so it's just sort of a simpler way of writing stuff down. It's not as messy, but it may be like viewed as a summary of the finite dimensional stuff. I mean, it has the advantage that when you go to the infinite dimensional case, you get this infinite loop space. Okay, so
there's also something that's crying out here to be thought of as a symmetric monodal category, but I won't say anything about that right now. Go ahead, yes?
You mean the whole big wad of them, or one of them? I mean, both of those.
One of them, associated to one of them, there's a symmetric monodal category.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's the kind of thing where I want to get into ultimately, because that's.
I mean, maybe I'm sort of guessing, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think each of these are spectra that can be obtained from some symmetric monodal category.
Category or something, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, topological category, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say anything about that, but that's sort of like the direction I would like to head, in the direction of like trying to understand it better. But
sure. I'm still just trying to follow the table here. So the first column of the table, the left-hand column of the table.
You're not letting me talk about that. I started,
okay.
And then you pushed me back to talking about.
Okay, I thought I was already behind here. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I explained this one more. And all I told you so far is that there's another recipe, which I haven't explained at all, for getting symmetric spaces from Clifford algebras, which again has a kind of Bott periodicity phenomenon to it. And then if you take the infinite limit there, you get these symmetric spaces. And if you look at this, you'll notice that this first list here is just the other list upside down.
So what is that symbol or that letter? It looks like a Y or an R.
That's the letter upsilon.
Upsilon.
And I said I'm going to call them upsilon just because this letter doesn't get used very often.
Okay.
But that's a kind of joke. But I needed some other letter.
Sure.
It wasn't omega. Yeah,
sure.
I know. This is the exact opposite of what you like to do. So,
right. But are the upsilons Clifford algebras? Did you already tell me that?
No, the upsilons are these spaces.
Oh, those spaces. Okay.
And these are the same spaces as these, but they're listed in the opposite order.
Okay. Yes.
Reverse order, and and so like well, I haven't told you how you get these upsilons, so it's not a question you can help me with at this present moment. But the puzzle is, why do they come out to be listed in exactly the opposite order? So that's the puzzle, which only makes sense once you know what the upsilons are.
Sure.
I think I explained the omegas enough for now, although I mean, obviously there's like a lot to say about like why they work out the way they do, and I could talk about that. But let me just say let me just leave it at that, and maybe tell you what the upsilons are, because that's probably like the most grading point of incomplete explanation. So
at some point, I also just want to get a little historical background on definition and history of what a symmetric space is, but doesn't have to be right now.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know too much about the history, but one thing I know is that Cartan had some idea of what a symmetric space was. And after probably like the day after he classified the semi-simple, the algebras, he classified some kind of symmetric spaces in a Dinkin diagram type classification. And he found 10
symmetric spaces. Okay, that's interesting. 10 infinite families.
He didn't just focus on the compact ones, but I'm focusing on the compact ones. So you could sort of think of these as like after you classify compact simple Lie groups with Dinkin diagrams, you go ahead and you classify compact symmetric spaces, which include the compact Lie groups as examples, but those people
Yes.
don't think of as examples. But I am here, in fact, including them. And
Yes.
well, not right here, but somewhere I say that maybe not here, but somewhere, yeah, Cartan got like 10 infinite families and maybe a bunch of exceptional ones, which I'm not going to talk about. So, okay, and so the tenfold way is related to the fact that there are 10 kinds of Clifford algebra where you're keeping track of both the 8 real and the 2 complex Morita equivalence classes. Let me just talk about the real ones though, because there's enough to do right now. And then there's 10 families of symmetric spaces, compact symmetric spaces. And I'm gonna get, so 8 of them are sort of have these upsilons as their infinite limits, infinite size limits. So let me tell you how we get these upsilons, then I can talk about something actual real. Okay. So for me, a Clifford algebra is generated by a bunch of anti-commuting square roots of -1 today.
Yes.
Although you can, and you can make them into star algebras by making these square roots of -1 be odd. And that's what I'm going to do. And so then inside that star algebra, you can talk about unitary.
I mean, there's also some conceptual interpretation of that star operation in terms of what the star modules of that star algebra are. But we don't have to worry about that either. But okay.
Well, I want you to sometime, well, can you say in a sentence what that is? I mean, I think I might know it. But I'm actually using these star modules, not so much here, but for the omegas, for that approach, I'm talking all about these star modules. So,
well, it's, you know, star modules have an inner product themselves, and that inner product is related in some way to the inner product of the inner product space from which we're taking a Clifford algebra. And I didn't say exactly what way it's related, but it should be a fun way of how it's related.
Okay. I have this feeling that like a star module of a Clifford algebra, it's something like a real inner product space with a sphere action on it, whatever the hell that actually means, because
say that again. Did you say a star module?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's true. I mean, what am I trying to say? Like a star module of the complex numbers is really a real vector space with a one parameter group of isometries and these one parameter isometries, they proceed at constant angular speed.
Right.
Yeah, so it's something like that. It's
so in that case, so that's a case where, of course, the circle is actually a group. So you can say a circle action and people will know what you mean. So it gets more exciting when you go up to the next one, and then so I'm hoping you're confirming to me that there's like, did you get something that's like a 2-sphere of isometries in that case? And that's what you call like a 2-sphere action in a sort of jokey way. I mean, but it has to, it's not just like a bunch of random isometries, one for each point of the two-sphere, but it's something like what you're saying, like it moves along at constant speed, no matter which way you march along the two-sphere or something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that-
there's a whole bunch of variations on this, depending on which star algebra you're taking star modules of, you know?
Yeah, I
Some-
was talking about these Clifford algebras with a bunch of square roots of -1. So like the next one would be the, after the complexes would be the quaternions.
Yeah, so right. It probably is.
I think
Yeah,
something
so-
like that has to be true.
Yeah, it very much is for the quaternions. I mean, basically every quaternion vector space is a, you know, in a very nice way, what am I trying to say? I mean, it's really just copies of the tautological representation of SO3 or something like that. Almost a tautological representation. Sorry, I'm saying, I'm speaking very loosely. I should go home and think about it more before I try to answer any of your questions. But
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, I
Yeah.
see what you mean there, but what I don't like about that is that we went up to SO3, whereas I think there's some sense in, I mean, I understand why you did, but I think there's some sense or other in which after the circle action, you should get like a two-sphere showing up when you look at the star modules of the Clifford algebra with two generating square roots of -1.
sure, there's
and
something
you sort of
that.
like somehow, well, because you could like, so you got like two guys, I and J, and they anti-commute. And somehow from that, you know, you get IJ equals K, and then you get the
Yeah, there's something like that, but I'm not sure how much I've thought about that. We might have to think about that more.
Yeah. The reason why these these sphere actions are interesting to me is because it's sort of a way of understanding why these iterated loop spaces are showing up. That us Milnor talks about like geodesics in a space of geodesics in a space of geodesics, and
Yeah.
those are really like circles in a space of circles in a space of circles, but done in such a way that you get access to the higher homotopy groups. That is, you get maps from spheres into like O infinity, and then so you get like the space of those geodesic maps from a sphere into O infinity is like giving you some a model of the loop space. They're the nth loop space of O infinity. So anyway, yeah. So yeah, okay. So let me march on.
Okay.
So each Clifford algebra here has this group of unitary elements.
Yes.
And so here I just work out what those unitary groups are.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of focus on the n goes to infinity limit just for some kind of notational reasons, or well, also because it is connected to infinite loop spaces. So the reals gives you like that is the well, so they're all like all these Clifford algebras, like reals, then like 8 by 8 matrices of reals, sorry, 16 by 16 matrices of reals, and 16 by 16 matrices of those. Those are all the 0 mod 8 Clifford algebras. And their groups of isometries are things like O1, and then you jump up to like O16, and then jump up to O32, and so on. So you take a kind of direct limit of those, and you get O infinity. So then, anyways, you get O, U, SP, then you get SP times SP.
Yes.
Then you get SP. Then you get
Yes.
U. Then you get O, and then you get O times O. But so you get these infinite dimensional groups, but you could think of them as like, yeah, co-limits of finite dimensional groups, if you prefer. And then here's how we get the symmetric spaces. This is how I came up with a way of getting symmetric spaces, which is each of these Clifford algebras is actually a super algebra where all these generating square roots of -1 are odd. And then there's this cool fact that
Yes.
as an algebra, each Clifford algebra is isomorphic to the even part of the next Clifford algebra.
Yes.
Which is a slightly funny thing to say, of course, because you get this inclusion of cliff n into cliff n plus 1. I mean, you have to work to show that it exists. But that's not an inclusion of super algebras, because
Right.
all of cliff n is getting mapped into the even part of cliff n plus 1.
Right.
So it's like we're like using the Z-mod 2 grading, but then also cleverly not using it to get this conclusion. And so what that winds up meaning, though, is that the unitary, but it is a map of star algebras, which I didn't emphasize here. So it's not a map of super algebras, but it is a map of star algebras you can show. So that is, each generating square root of -1 in cliff n, you have to map it to a product of 2 square roots of -1 in here to get something even. But you can do it in a way that preserves the relations, and then it winds up mapping skew adjoints to skew adjoints because a product of 2 anti-commuting skew adjoints is skew adjoint. Yeah. So it's a little, there's probably some like really beautiful conceptual reason for why that's true. But what it winds up giving you then is a way of thinking of each of these unitary groups that I was like outlining in this chart here.
I mean, of course, this has me wondering if there's multiple Z-mod 2 gradings floating around, but I don't want to worry about that right now either.
That could be true. Yep. But when you're done, though, so you get like a Lie group included in another Lie group. That is, the unitaries included in the unitaries here. And so so you get a symmetric space because,
well, you certainly get a homogeneous space, and then you somehow
get a homogeneous space.
You're going to show me that for some reason it's symmetric.
Yeah, so for some reason it's symmetric, and the reason I say down at the end here is that the big group has a Z-mod, it's a Lie algebra, has a Z-mod 2 grading because of this super stuff.
Right. Okay. Yeah, there certainly is a thing about that, about how you could think of us. I mean, in the finite dimensional cases where I sort of think I know what a symmetric space is, you can actually, in the compact case at least, and then we are dealing with something like a compact case here.
Yeah, we are definitely. Yeah.
Or an direct limit of compact cases or something like that. You can think of a symmetric space as a Lie group with an involution on it.
Right.
And the sort of skew fixed part is, don't tell me, that's the symmetric space, right? And the other part is the group or something like that. There's the fixed part and the skew fixed part of this involution on this Lie group. And
yeah, for some reason I'll have to think about that. I'm more used to thinking about it at the Lie algebra level for some stupid reason.
Absolutely. I mean, at the Lie algebra level, I mean, it's this Lie triple system. That's this Lie, that's almost the same thing in the sort of compact case as this Lie algebra with a suitable involution.
Yeah. So that's what the last way of thinking about it is what I'm thinking about here, which is that the Lie algebra of the unitaries of the Clifford algebra.
Well, when you write unitaries there, that makes you look like you're dealing with the Lie group, And then when you talk about the self-adjoints,
Yeah. So, okay. So, I mean, I could shortcut it. I could just say like the skew adjoints in the Clifford algebra form a Lie algebra. And
you're happy with that spacing, the way the C is
no,
from the lift? You're not
No.
happy. Okay.
no, but I have slightly more important things to do with my time. I should, okay.
Okay.
Maybe I should go back and figure out how
The
to
meaning of lift, right? Okay.
yeah, fix that. So so that's why we get symmetric spaces, if you get my drift. So
yes, I'm halfway getting your drift at least. Yes, I should be able to understand that when I go home and think about it. Yes, that's very good, very helpful.
yeah, so I came up with this trick when I had heard that, like, oh, Clifford algebras are giving you all these symmetric spaces, and so I worked it out. You get these nice infinite series of symmetric spaces, and I want to conceptually understand these symmetric spaces. These symmetric spaces, sorry, my video is eating too much resources. These symmetric spaces feel to me like they're kind of dehydrated versions of categories or something like that. Like a typical one would be like a Grassmannian. So like the space of all subspaces of a real vector space. And that feels to me like, just thinking of the space of them, which is this nice symmetric space, is sort of like
You left
like
out the double N in Grassmannians right there.
Oh no, I left out a bunch of the double S's and I inserted them. Okay, okay.
Okay.
You're fixing all these typos. Okay.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
That's supposed to show that I'm paying attention.
I did.
Actually, it shows
Okay,
the opposite, but go ahead. Yes.
Okay, that's good. Well, I guess it's good then. So yeah, it means you're actually reading this stuff. So yeah, so I feel that like these different symmetric spaces that I'm alluding to here, or infinite dimensional symmetric spaces,
Yeah.
are probably better thought of in some category, well, not better, but alternatively thought of in some category theoretic way, which has to do with the fact that the individual Clifford algebras have categories of modules, or star modules, actually. And then here what we're doing is we're like looking at maps from each one into the next, well, from each Clifford algebra into the next one. And that actually like gives you a relation between their categories of modules. Like popping back over here. So like representations of Cliff 0 are real vector spaces, representations of Cliff 1 are complex vector spaces. Here I was like not including the star module stuff, just thinking of those modules. And so then you get this.
But you are including the super stuff, is that right?
Here I was not even including the super stuff.
Okay, but they're right. They're all those issues
But
you should worry about.
Yeah, that's right. I probably should.
Super module, yeah.
Yeah, so I probably should. But
it's certainly helpful to get a start with this stuff. Yes.
Yeah. So like here you have like real vector spaces and complex vector spaces in this adjunction. And then like one of our symmetric spaces will be a space of complex structures on a real vector space.
Yes.
And so I was just wondering, so one question I had for you is like, is that something that you've thought about a lot? It seems like it should be like something everyone always thinks about. Like when you have like a forgetful functor, like from complex vector spaces to real vector spaces.
See, I almost thought we had talked about this when we were thinking about I can't remember any of the terminology, but yeah, this really shows up. What am I trying to say? I mean, these are like some kind of twisted Grassmannians that you're talking about. You know, a space of, I mean, if you look at how people study the space of complex structures on a real vector space, what they do tends to have something like, man, I'm totally screwing this up, but it's something like they take the complexification of the real vector space, and then they look at these half-dimensional subspaces in there that are, you know, secretly just the original real vector space equipped with a complex structure on it. And is this at all responsive to your question? I mean, you know, these yeah.
For some weird reason, I haven't been thinking about that particular one, but I've been thinking about some other. I mean, there are like 8 of these things. I've been thinking about another one where you have like a snappy description of what it is you're talking about, and then they tell you, oh, you know, it's actually this quotient space of this group by this other group, and it's not like instantly obvious that that's right, and then you have to think about it a different way. But what I was hoping for you to help me with was, it just seems to be like a super basic categorical construction where you could have, it's not a moduli space, but it's just like a space of, it's like the fiber of a forgetful functor. Like
well, yeah, I mean, that's a space of,
sometimes
that's a homogeneous space. Go ahead, yeah.
So tell me like your story of like what's the good way to think about like a fiber of a forgetful functor as being, well, either a homogeneous space, maybe it's not always true that all the structures look alike. There's some cases like the complex structure case where they all look alike in some sense. Then there's some other cases here where actually, like you.
I mean, there are so many different answers to give here, and I probably can't, because there are so many different answers to give, probably can't do a good job of giving any of them. But in particular, I'm pulled in different directions here. Like, you know, in some ways, you're asking me to be the category theorist, but I'm actually pulled in some other seemingly different directions as well. There's all these things about what am I trying to say? That you know, there are these generalized Grassmannians that are homogeneous spaces with respect to parabolic subgroups, and there are these twisted parabolic subgroups when you're working over the reals or something like that. And there's a whole bunch of things going on there. And again, I'm not saying it in a way that actually is correct or actually makes sense, but it's something like that. And
so that
yeah,
would be great to talk about, and it's because I haven't really thought about modding out biparabolic subgroups in the real case, so I can see, and of course here it's sort of all about the nuances of the real case. So that'll be really fun to talk about. But I was hoping to like try to force you to act like a category theorist and talk in lofty generalities, saying like, oh, whenever you have a forgetful functor and an object in the base category, you get a space. Well, what is that?
well, I mean,
like if you have a topological category, you have a space of objects above it, which is,
again, so much of it has to be groupoids rather than categories.
Well, maybe that's fine. I'd be happy to throw out all the,
you know, and there's this whole thing about, you know, what am I trying to say? You know, there are very elegant category theoretic / groupoid theoretic ways of thinking about double cosets. And again, that's kind of what we're talking about here secretly with these parabolic subgroups and things like that. Right, there's all these, right, okay. So one of the things that's going on here is the homotopy pullback of groupoids. There's a whole lot of homotopy pullback of groupoids going on here. Whether there's any homotopy pullback of categories going on here.
Don't worry
Well,
about the categories. I don't
Say it
care
again?
about that. I don't really care about
it
that.
may,
I just said that.
I mean, there may very well be something like that, but there's a whole bunch of stuff about
See,
homotopy
but
pullback of groupoids going on here. Yeah.
see, the thing that was bugging me is that it seemed to be that I was using.
I'm mostly right. I mean, the notion of homotopy is sort of already ambiguous here because we have, topology and groupoids. But, so I was meaning it homotopy in the groupoid sense, but it's probably mixed in together with all this other stuff. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So the kind of thing that's bugging me that I was having trouble getting a handle on
Yeah.
is that, like, if you have, I'll just do an example. If you've got a real vector space, it has this space of complex structures on it. Or even you would just worry about the set of complex structures on it. So somehow that set emerges out of the groupoid of complex vector spaces sitting over the groupoid of real vector spaces. I mean, that's all there. And maybe some topological enrichment or something there.
Yeah.
But how do you say what's going on there? That we have like why are we getting, where's this space of complex structures on the given real vector space coming from? If you could tell me, oh, it's a homotopy pullback of something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can do it under pressure, but I can do it, if I think about it some more. But I'm tempted to say, there's just some homotopy fiber here of groupoids.
That's what I need to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, but it's very straightforward, and it
sounds like it should be straightforward.
It's very straightforward, and when you see how it works out, you realize that it's just kind of putting group stuff into groupoid language. It's very familiar group stuff about homogeneous spaces and stuff like that. But it's just I mean, basically the whole theory of homogeneous spaces of groups. It is worth putting into the language of groupoids, and that's part of what we're saying here. I think that's just a huge part of what's going on here.
Yeah, for some reason it feels a little different than the stuff we used to talk about, and I don't know why. I mean, it's incredibly simple.
It could be there's all sorts of other things going on here that I'm not quite catching yet. That I'm
I don't think. Well, there are other things, but this particular thing is supposed to be really, really simple. So,
well, I think it is just the idea that I mean, the really simple thing going on here is just the idea that homogeneous spaces of groups really, really fit into the formalism of groupoids.
So I should remember all this, but what's the vanilla way to think about G mod H when G is some symmetry group of some thing, and then H is some subgroup of it that's like when you put some more structure on that thing.
Again, I don't feel good about doing this under pressure because I know there are really simple things going on here. And I'm probably not
well, anyway,
really
can I put it on the queue then? Or just put it.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out one example here that that sounds like it's related in some way to things that you're talking about. And this is just the idea of the Lagrangian Grassmannian of a symplectic vector space. That's really related to there's like a twisted version of that. That's the unitary structures on, I guess, a symplectic vector space. Yeah, the unitary structures on a symplectic vector space. If I'm not screwing up too badly, that's something like a twisted version of the Lagrangian Grassmannian.
I've been thinking about those things just like in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
And I think I probably, I understand some stuff about that better than I did.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of interesting stuff going on here, and I just feel that it's really likely that I'm not giving you the good answers as you ask me these questions. A lot of these questions you're asking have really good answers, and I'm probably not giving you the good answers yet. But if we think about them some more,
okay, yeah,
much better answers.
yeah. So like this reminds me of the kind of stuff that you were just talking about. So like so you could look at the unitary group, like UN, I'm calling it 2R for some idiotic reason here. But
yeah.
Over O2R.
Yeah.
And that is the space of Lagrangian subspaces of a, well, there's a reason why I call it 2R, because it has to be even dimensional symplectic vector space. So this Lagrangian Grassmannian, which you're mentioning. And so like the other day I was thinking like, my God, how in the world is the Lagrangian Grassmannian unitary over orthogonal? It's supposed to be about the symplectic group, not about unitary and orthogonal. But anyway, so like
there are some very fun things going on here.
I asked some people and they said like, come on, it's obvious, and it was obvious. And so then I stuck the answer in Wikipedia so that I would and so the idea is that you're trying to understand all the Lagrangian subspaces of a 2n dimensional real vector space. So you say, okay, well, just make it into a complex vector space like Cn. And then the Lagrangian subspaces of that will then be the real subspaces of Cn on which the symplectic structure, the imaginary part of the inner product, vanishes. And so like, for example, Rn sitting inside Cn is a Lagrangian subspace then. And then I had to convince myself that the unitary group acts transitively on these Lagrangian subspaces. That was like the hardest part. It's not hard, but, and then that the stabilizer of Rn is just the orthogonal group. That's easy. It's just, that's what's fixed. That's what fixes Rn sitting inside Cn. And so you get a homogeneous space. You get your space of Lagrangian subspaces is UN mod ON. So that's the kind of thing that sounds like what you're sort of like trying to talk about, which I've been thinking about too.
Yeah,
it's really cool. It's very simple.
It is. It's just I'm sure I'm screwing up the details at the moment. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, so so this is like one of 8 little things you need to know, some of which are simpler. This is like one of the medium hard ones to understand. None of them are so hard to understand really, but this is like one of the cool ones because it sort of really illustrates the links between the unitary, the orthogonal, and the symplectic group that you're trying to understand Lagrangian subspaces, and you describe them in terms of U and O.
So I mean,
so
this,
anyway, yeah,
this
cool.
the reason I've thought about this stuff a lot, even though at the moment I'm confident that I'm not remembering the details correctly. I'm confident that it's much simpler than I'm trying to state it. But the reason I've thought about it a bunch is because of this whole business about how the Jacobian of a curve has this unitary structure, and it involves this interaction between all these other structures: the complex structure, the unitary, the orthogonal structure, the symplectic structure, and how those all fit together. And so I'm just saying that this story really comes into its own really when you start thinking about the Jacobians of curves as that's a very linear case. Well, I don't know, but
well, the grown-ups use all this linear stuff as a warm-up for studying bundles.
That's right. So remember, you and me. I mean, in fact, the stuff that we're talking about, we probably even talked about it in our discussions at some point, because I mean, we were talking a lot about the Jacobians of curves, and but part of the point is that what I mean, right? We were looking at what am I trying to say? We were looking at holomorphic line bundles over abelian varieties, and that was a ridiculously that was a the adult version of that was when you started thinking about the holomorphic line bundles over the non-abelian varieties. And so right, what are we saying? That there are these abelian varieties are very, very simple cases of Kähler manifolds, and like you're saying, these Kähler manifolds in general are the sort of adult version of unitary vector spaces, that they have unitary vector spaces at every tangent space. And so yeah, again, I'm mixing a whole bunch of things together here, but we may have actually talked about some of this when we were thinking about holomorphic line bundles over abelian varieties, because yeah,
it's fun. I mean, I've definitely thought about how people use this K theory. I mean, people would call this Bott periodicity K theory.
Right. So part of what's going on in that story is that you have everything that we were talking about in the linear case, but then you also have these lattices. So you end up dealing with these groups over the integers as well, and you get integer forms of these groups as well, and the integer forms and the complex forms and the real forms, they all interact together, and there's lots of really fun stories that we're forgetting to tell. But yeah, there's a lot of, right, the integer symplectic group and all that stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, I'll quit. So I'll just leave as like a request to make it extremely concrete. I'll repeat my concrete request, which is give me a nice story sometime for the space of complex structures on a real vector space, meaning some kind of clean categorical story of where that space emerges from. That would be like an example, of course, of a general phenomenon, but it's
okay. Yeah, I don't have anything intelligent to say about it yet, but I should go home and think about it.
Okay.
So
sounds good.
I think we should turn off the recording now because I have stuff to show on the screen.
Okay.
That I need to prepare a little bit.
Okay, we'll give the audience an intermission here.
Yeah.
Starting now.
Okay.
Okay, we're back.
Okay, so I have more stuff to say about designs, and I think on the screen now, I think you can see this picture that we already. It's pretty much the same picture we already showed last time, and it's one of these designs, one of these dessins d'enfant or whatever people call them. And so even just getting Mathematica to produce this picture was like a big victory for me last time. But I guess in a way the big thing that I want to talk about today, the big sort of concrete result is, I mean, we mentioned last time that, well, let me sort of show you what it is. This is on the screen. You can see Mathematica printing out stuff with things, square root symbols in it.
Yeah, numbers like 834 and 417. Yeah, it looks pretty scary. Yep.
Yeah, there's actually a variable g in there, which I don't really want. Just try to set g equal to 1 there. Or you can see in smaller print, unfortunately, you can see some of the numbers that you get when you set g equals to 1 there.
Yep.
And so this is right. This is evidence that I did get Mathematica to. I did succeed in getting Mathematica to come up with symbolic solution of these designs. These designs are now appearing as explicit algebraic objects.
Yeah.
And that's, a confirmation of a big conjecture that I've been trying to settle. And I mean, this is just one specific example, but it's, well, when I say one specific example, it's actually a pair of examples. It's this picture on the screen and this other picture on the screen. And these are two of these designs that are in the same orbit under the Grothendieck-Teichmüller group. And these are what I call Gaussian designs, because they sort of come from the Gaussian integers. And so what am I trying to say? That this is just this pair of designs being algebraically equivalent to each other, even though they look very different as pictures. That's again the confirmation of a conjecture of my own. So what am I trying to say? That I mean, what I'm doing here. So yes, this Gaussian integers is related to elliptic curves with complex multiplication by the Gaussian integers. And this is the subject matter of a very old 19th century part of algebra and or geometry, which is the Jugendtraum, Kronecker's Jugendtraum, which is all about elliptic curves with complex multiplication, and then perhaps generalization to abelian varieties with complex multiplication. And, you know, so one of my conjectures is that we can fit the Jugendtraum inside the more 20th century theory, or 20th century theory of the designs, of Grothendieck-Teichmüller theory. And so the results that I'm getting here with, you know, these Mathematica producing these ridiculous algebraic formulas, symbolic formulas, which describe these designs, that's confirmation for me of this idea that the Jugendtraum does fit into the theory of, into Grothendieck-Teichmüller theory in exactly the way I was hoping. And so what is the point of that? Is that the point of that is not that this is new or anything. The point of that is that I'm trying to reduce Grothendieck-Teichmüller theory to something, to an incredibly simple special case that's so simple that even I can understand it. And that's this, you know, these Gaussian designs, which work by these 19th century Jugendtraum ideas, elliptic curves with complex multiplication. And this is such a simple part, this is such an enormous simplification of the general idea of Grothendieck-Teichmüller theory. It's so simple that even I can understand it. And so that's why I'm in a very happy, optimistic, declaring victory mood about this. So, and like I say, you know, it's just, this program is really just showing us this one pair of designs for which the formulas are working out very nicely. But it seems clear that this is actually going to work for all of the Gaussian designs. And again, you know, there aren't, the Gaussian designs are much, much more restricted than the general designs. Like, for example, the part or the coarsening of the absolute Galois group that the Gaussian designs see is very, very coarse. So, you know, the coarsening of the absolute Galois group that we can understand by means of the Gaussian designs is very coarse. But nevertheless, you know, from my point of view of trying to understand these very abstract subjects in a way that I can make concrete so that even I can understand it, this is very promising for me, and you know, even though it's such a simplification or an oversimplification of Grothendieck-Teichmüller theory in general, it really encourages me to try to use this very simplified version of Grothendieck-Teichmüller theory as a stepping stone to try to understand Grothendieck-Teichmüller theory in general, and then to try to understand even more grander things in general, trying to understand all of Galois theory, et cetera, trying to understand all of the universe, et cetera, et cetera. So this is all just propaganda for why I'm in a sort of happy mood and claiming that, you know, these ridiculous results that I'm getting with my Mathematica programs are actually very promising and helpful to me. So part of the hope is I can get you to sort of be in a somewhat happy mood, similar to the happy mood that I'm in here.
So I want to ask some questions.
Go ahead.
About. So I mean, you've been telling me about this stuff for a while, but
Yes.
Are these equations? Can you stare at these horrible looking formulas and see that they're related to each other by Galois transformations, by the Galois group of the Gaussians?
I'm not sure I completely understand your question, but I think the answer is yes. I mean, that's what we want to try to do today. I mean, so
Okay.
I'm sort of very disorganized today, but we are going to like stare at some of these ridiculous formulas, and they really are ridiculous. And part of the blame for why these formulas are so ridiculous is because Mathematica tries to do ridiculous things just to present the results in solved form. And if they just didn't try to put them in solved form, you could still see that these are algebraic numbers. And well, so one of the things I'm saying is that Mathematica also produces minimal polynomials for some of these algebraic numbers. And for the most part, it's better to just ignore these ridiculous formulas that we're getting here and just use the minimal polynomials, which are much simpler to work with. So we're going to be doing some stuff like that. Instead of working with this ridiculous number here, we're going to be looking at its minimal polynomial, which is just like a quartic polynomial. And then that quarter, for some reason, which we're going to try to understand, that quartic polynomial actually factors into quadratics over the square root of 3. So, right, and that's right. I mean, quadratics are ridiculously simple to work with, but that's sort of what, you know, is to be expected here. We're supposed to have just a doublet of designs. So it's just, you know, the whole coarsening of the absolute Galois group that's just acting on this pair of designs is just, you know, Z mod 2. And so it should just be a quadratic thing. And
so Gaussian designs come in singlets and doublets because the Galois group of the Gaussians is just Z mod 2. Is that?
No, just this particular pair happens to be a doublet. So this is
what's the group that's acting on them?
On all the Gaussian designs together. What's that coarsening? That coarsening is, yeah, that's very interesting. And you may get slightly different answers depending on exactly which way you do it, but it's going to be something like, I mean, it has a whole lot to do with complex multiplication. So it's something like you take GL1 over the Gaussian integers. Well, that's only a 4-element group. That's not very impressive. But if you take GL1, if you take sort of pro-finite version of that, so you're taking an inverse limit of GL1 over the finite quotients of the Gaussian integers. And that's much more impressive. You know, that's a big infinite pro-finite group. And, you know, that is the group that's, you know, the group that the Jugendtraum tells us is involved in how the Gaussian elliptic curve fits into the Jugendtraum. So it's
you haven't really explained that, or at least not
well. Okay,
enough for me to remember.
Say that again.
Sometime I don't want to learn what the hell is going on with that.
Well, okay, so I forgot to write that down in my notes, but yeah, let me try to say that right now. Let me try to give you I've taken several stabs previously at trying to tell you what is this alleged understanding of the Jugendtraum that I think I understand.
Uh-huh.
But I don't think I've ever succeeded in saying it the right way. I'm going to take another stab at it right now.
Okay.
But it's going to be in a ridiculous, oversimplified slogan form. But I think it really gets at an essential truth here. So what am I trying to say? So the Jugendtraum is all about, the original Jugendtraum, it might have generalizations, but the original Jugendtraum is about elliptic curves with complex multiplication. I think, in my understanding. Elliptic curves with complex multiplication. And then in some sense, it's all about the Galois theory of those elliptic curves with complex multiplication. And in particular, how the absolute Galois group of the rational numbers, how it acts on, one way to think of it is on the torsion points of elliptic curves with complex multiplication. And okay, so the slogan I'm trying to get to here is just that, what am I trying to say? It's like the action of the absolute Galois group in this context is the complex multiplication. That's the slogan. Now you have to, in order to understand what that really means, you have to parse it and see, why does that parse? Why does it make sense to interpret the action of the absolute Galois group as being, in a certain context here, dealing with torsion points on these elliptic curves? Why does it parse? Why does it make sense to think of that as also being this complex multiplication? But that's the basic idea.
Okay.
Now, somehow that doesn't get to, there's this fascinating relationship between the that fact, which I often put under the heading of the Jugendtraum. There's a fascinating relationship of how that relates to the Artin reciprocity theorem. It's a fascinating relationship between the Artin reciprocity theorem and the Jugendtraum. And I often struggle to try to explain that relationship to you, and I'm not succeeding in doing that today. So there's still something missing here, the Artin reciprocity theorem. But maybe you can even just bypass the Artin reciprocity theorem, at least for now. So I'm trying to convey to you some significant truth about the Jugendtraum without worrying about the Artin reciprocity theorem, and that basic truth is supposed to be tied up in that slogan that, in the context of the Jugendtraum, in the context of understanding the Galois theory of torsion points on an elliptic curve with complex multiplication, in that context, the absolute Galois action is the complex multiplication. And that's kind of the whole thing. And now that was supposed to be responsive to something you were complaining about here. Well, I mean, that's what's going on here. I'm claiming that that's exactly what I'm demonstrating here. Now, I'm demonstrating it only with a very special case here.
Well, why don't you demonstrate it here? I mean, what is it? Let's see it.
Well, I'm not sure that was the right question to ask, because I'm not sure I have a good answer to it right now. I mean, part of the problem is that these designs that I'm showing you here, these are genus 0 designs. So they have double covers that are genus 1 designs. So you don't really see the Gaussian integers very well unless you take the double cover of these things. And I don't have the double covers set up here. I just have the genus 0 things set up here. So I don't think you can, it's not really set up so you can see the Gaussian integers in this picture.
I was hoping you would show me something about these minimal polynomials or something and say, look, it's working because blah, blah.
Well,
I didn't mean
I'm going to try to do something like that. I'm going to try to do something like that. But I was also just trying to right. I'm trying to do many things at the same time, and I'm not doing any of them very well. But you were also asking about what is the coarsening of the absolute Galois group that you can see by means of the Gaussian designs. And I'm saying that it's this sort of pro-finite version of the multiplicative group of the Gaussian integers. And that's all classical in the sense of going back to the Jugendtraum. Okay, so first of all, there's this program that just shows us the pictures, and you can also see some of these ridiculous formulas. There's another program I just want to click over to at the moment, which has some, let's see, do we have, okay, there are some of the minimal, no, those are not the minimal polynomials. Where are the minimal polynomials? There are the minimal polynomials. These are minimal polynomials for the coefficients of like the polynomials in this left-hand column here are minimal polynomials for the coefficients of the numerator of the rational function that we're dealing with here. The rational Belyi function that we're dealing with here. The right-hand side is the minimal polynomials of the denominator of that rational function.
This is for one of those designs, or
this is for one of them, and it's repeated like 20 different times because, and the fact that it's repeated all those 20 times, it's the important thing is that it's repeated twice. It's repeated for both of those designs. It ends up getting repeated 16 times instead of just 2 times, just because of little glitches in the program that are unimportant. Has to do with permuting the vertexes in the design versus permuting the designs. So yeah, the fact that we're getting the same minimal polynomials showing up over and over again, that's confirmation of the conjecture. That's showing that those 2 different designs are giving us the same minimal polynomials. Now there's still, there's a little bit more than that to check to make sure that we're really getting symbolically equivalent Gaussian designs, but I'm pretty sure it's working. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's working. There's still things I need to check, but I'm pretty sure it's working. So I think you can see that these are all quartic polynomials that we get here, or most of them are quartic polynomials. Now, somewhere down here, I start factoring them. This is, and again, I'm so disorganized. This is very hard to read. I mean, these polynomials are printed vertically now instead of horizontally, but you can sort of see that there are quadratic polynomials in there that are the factors of those quartic polynomials. And this factorization happened when I factored over the square root of 3. Now, you might wonder why the magic number square root of 3 is showing up here. I mean, I think I first tried factoring over the Gaussian integers, and I think that didn't really help. They didn't factor. They were still quartic at that point. But well, for one thing, I could look at the formulas, and I saw that square root of 3 was showing up in the formulas a lot. So I decided to factorize with respect to square root of 3, putting square root of 3 in the base field. But there's another reason why square root of 3 sort of makes sense to show up here. So what am I trying to say here? That if we take the Gaussian integers mod 3, and am I saying this right? Then there's this group that includes the translations. I guess it's like the affine general linear group of the Gaussian integers modulo 3. And it's a 36 element group. And if you think about why it's a 36 element group, it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, this is
9 times 4.
yeah, that's right. That's probably a good explanation. I mean, we've drawn pictures of this before where we've seen why it's a 36 element group, but I don't have it. I'm disorganized. I don't have any of the good pictures of this 36 element group available. But so that 36 element group, so the designs have a lot to do with the representation of that group, which is the representation of that group. The Gaussian designs have a lot to do with the representation of that group, or these particular Gaussian designs have to do with the representation of that group acting on sets. But for some reason, I decided to think about the representations of that group acting on vector spaces, acting on complex vector spaces. So the representation theory of that 36 element group. And the square root of 3 sort of shows up in that. Now, I'm so disorganized that I can't tell you exactly how it shows up. I think it doesn't show up in the characters of that group. I was doing calculations with my friend, and I'm trying to remember what he told me. But I think the square root of 3 doesn't show up in the characters of that, but it shows up in the matrix elements of the irreducible representations of that group. So somehow, well, actually, what actually happens is the cube roots of 1, the primitive cube roots of 1 show up in the representation theory of that 36 element group. And so that's the square root of -3. And then meanwhile, we're also working over, we're doing Gaussian design, so we're sort of working over the Gaussian integers. So that gives us I. That gives us the complex number I. So we have the complex number I, and we have the complex number square root of -3, which maybe is, I mean, right when I started seeing Mathematica producing these formulas that had square root of 3 in them, I just started, trying to take wild guesses as to why that square root of 3 might be showing up. So my silly wild guesses, maybe it has something to do with the way the square root of 3 is hidden in the representation theory of this group that we're dealing with. So I'm still trying to straighten out why it is that I only managed to get these quadratic polynomials when I either just put square root of 3 into the base, or else put I and the square root of -3 into the base. I mean, right? I mean, if you put, right? I mean, I is, right? I mean, my silly story I'm telling myself at this point is that I is there because of the Gaussian integers. It generates the Gaussian integers. And then I'm saying square root of -3 is in there because it's magically hidden inside the representation theory of the group that we're dealing with. And then from those two, you get the square root of 3. And it turns out that it's over the square root of 3 that these things factor into quadratics. And I just know that I want them to factor into quadratics because I want to get this doublet, this Galois doublet of designs. But right, but it's very disorganized. I want to make the, I'm declaring victory, but it's declaring victory in a very disorganized way. We need to clarify this much better. We need to, like, for example, one of the things that we need to do here, one of the things that I need to do here is I need to understand this idea of the so-called moduli field of a design. So the moduli field of a design is supposed to be something like the finite dimensional extension field of the rational numbers that incorporates all of the algebraic numbers that are sort of secretly hidden in the design. And I'm still a little bit confused about what that moduli field should be for these particular designs. I mean, since they're just in a doublet, it feels like it should just be a quadratic extension of the rational numbers. But at the moment, I'm getting like it's a quadratic extension of the quadratic extension that you already get by putting in the square root of 3. So there's all these, right? There's all these glitches that I don't understand yet. But nevertheless, that's not stopping me from declaring victory and saying that, you know, we're really close to understanding how this works, how this example works. And then once we claim that we understand this example, then we claim that we understand all the Gaussian designs, and then all the designs, and then all of Galois, and all of everything in the world. And so yeah, so let me just say a little bit more about the sort of gritty algebra here that we're staring at here. So we're getting these quadratic polynomials, and the coefficients of these quadratic polynomials have the square root of 3.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, supposed to be the way it works, sort of. But so the coefficients of the coefficients of these quadratic polynomials have the square root of 3 in them, but they have something a little bit worse than that, right? You know, square root of 3 is just the first step, but then there are these. Am I saying that right? What am I trying to say? That
You've got these quadratic with the square root of 3 in them, so they're going to have 2 roots.
Right. These quadratic polynomials are themselves minimal polynomials of these other algebraic numbers that are embedded in these Gaussian designs. So, right. So we have to take the So at this point, I said to myself that, you know, I have a bunch of these polynomials. They're all quadratic polynomials. The coefficients of all of them involve square root of 3. And we're only supposed to get a doublet out of this. So somehow these should all be giving us the same single quadratic extension of, well, I want it to be of the rational numbers, but it's of the rational numbers adjoint square root of 3 at this point. So, so I figured what you know, flailing around, not sure what I should do. I decided that I would try to take the discriminants of all of these quadratic polynomials. And my hope was that all of these quadratic polynomials would have the same discriminant, which would, you know, my idea was that that would show us that we're just getting this one single quadratic extension, that all of these coefficients are living in that same quadratic extension or something like that. So, you know, I started doing some ridiculous gritty calculations here with Mathematica, trying to take the discriminants of these quadratic polynomials. And it's not quite working yet, but it's still promising. It looks like it's sort of gonna work. I mean, you can sort of see where it says to take the discriminant of that quadratic polynomial.
Yep.
And then I have a discriminant of another quadratic polynomial, and it's not giving. Well, what it's doing, the discriminants are turning out to be, the discriminants are themselves algebraic integers involving radical 3. And it's giving me, you know, not exactly the same discriminant. And
is it good enough that they're all in the same field?
No, that's not good enough. I don't think. I mean, I'm confused as hell, but I don't think that's good enough because.
Yeah.
But.
Okay.
But I'll tell you the slightly promising thing. The slightly promising thing is I took these algebraic integers that involve radical 3, and I took their, what am I trying to say?
Factor them in that field, in that number ring?
Maybe I should have done that. That's a good suggestion. I didn't try that, but that's a really good point. Maybe that's the sensible thing that I forgot to do. But I'll have to go and try that, something like that. But what I did try was I took these. I kind of took their sort of norms. You know, well, what do I mean by their norms? I mean, you can see I took like. Right, we've got 307,440 minus this number times radical 3. So it seemed like the sensible thing to do with this algebraic integer is to take the square of this number and add it times 3 times the square of this number. Actually, I take the difference between them. I think there's a reason that makes sense. And when I did that, I got some ordinary integers that are not exactly the same, but they're the same. They're the same. They give the same square free thing. In other words, they have some extra squares in them, but those squares maybe shouldn't make any difference. But maybe that really is telling me that the thing you said would work. Maybe the point is that I really should have factored these integers over the square root of 3 or something like that. So, like I say, this is ridiculously disorganized, but I really like your hint. That was very helpful. But still, I'm claiming that it's very promising and it's going to work out. So first of all, we're sort of short on time here. Do you have a deadline? Are we gonna?
No, we can go a little over.
Okay, let's just go a little bit over, not too much over, but let's see if I can say a few things here before we quit. So, yeah, right. I was just trying to show you some of this gritty Mathematica stuff and claiming that it's working, even though there are all sorts of glitches that I don't understand. But what you just suggested seems very helpful. Like maybe I should really try to factor those algebraic integers. Maybe that's the obvious thing I forgot to do. Factor those algebraic integers over square root of 3 and see what happens. Okay. I'm trying to organize my punchlines here for these things to try to say before we quit. So I did tell you a little bit about this slogan about the Jugendtraum. Again, I want to emphasize that.
I need to understand that someday. I don't understand it.
Can you say why you don't understand? I mean,
well, you sort of said yourself, because what does it even mean?
yeah. But right, and we don't have the right pictures because we don't have the double cover, which really looks like the Gaussian integer. But I'm still hoping you can, I was hoping you could magically somehow use your imagination and stretch it and see what I'm trying to say here. That well, okay, I'll have to leave that part of it at that for now. That really is the right slogan, I think. That there's this very abstract absolute Galois group that's acting. But in this context of the Jugendtraum, it's not just abstract, it's very concrete and visual. You just think about how you multiply things by Gaussian integers. And you can do this if on an elliptic curve, if you have an elliptic curve that has complex multiplication by the Gaussian integers. And the action of the absolute Galois group just becomes that complex multiplication, that very visual geometric complex multiplication operation.
Maybe I'm getting something confused, but but the complex multiplication maps the Gaussian integers to themselves.
That's right.
That forms a monoid, those complex multiplications.
Yes. Yes.
So what's the idea? Where does the group? How is the Galois group related to that monoid?
Well, it is what I suggested before, that even though that multiplicative monoid seems poverty-stricken in terms of having inverses, when it's just all by itself, if you start considering the finite quotients of the Gaussian integers, then all those invertible elements materialize that you didn't see at first.
So let me just try to say it. So you're saying that if you take the monoid of complex multiplications, whatever you call them, for the Gaussian integers mod p for different primes. And
and it could be Gaussian primes or regular primes, but yes, go ahead.
Sorry, did you answer that, or was that like a question?
No, I said yes. Yes. The
Gaussian primes or regular primes?
Oh, it's both are interesting. If you want to keep it simple, do it regular primes. Because that's
well, anyway, so I'll do regular primes, and then the question would be like, okay, so you take the inverse limit of those
yes.
finite monoids, and it happens to be a group, and it happens to be what group?
It happens to be this
Galois
group that acts on the, you could say it acts on the torsion points on the elliptic curve with complex multiplication, or you can say it acts on the coordinates, more concretely, it acts on the algebraic coordinates of these torsion points. Those are algebraic numbers, it turns out. And
but are you saying that that's like that group is some quotient of the absolute Galois group of the rationals?
yes, except perhaps modulo some slightly tiny glitch. You may need to take a slight coarsening of that group that we were talking about, and that's equal to a very gross coarsening of the absolute Galois group. Yes.
Does that little slight glitch have to do with like the real place or something like that?
I really feel incompetent to answer that question at the moment.
Okay.
It's not a really simple answer, but
I don't know that much about that either, but that often seems to be like a source of little glitches.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. I'll have to think about that.
Anyway, sometime I'd like to know this story in more detail, because for many weeks now, I feel like you've been working on this example.
Yes.
And I'm learning about this example, but I'm not like seeing what it's an example of so much.
Well, I should really try to show you some of the pictures for the next one. So this is like, this has to do with the prime 3. The next prime that works well is 7. So like there's a slightly larger thing, and you instead of getting a doublet, I think you get a 4-tuplet, I think.
Well, okay, but I also like general abstract nonsense, and so I'd also like to hear like a story that didn't have any examples. There was just some tale of your version. Well, maybe your version is intrinsically example driven, but it sounds like there's some theorem lurking around about the
Yes, I mean we haven't gotten there yet. Like I say, there's this paper I've been reading by Vilfacher or whatever his name is, and that's really going to help us, I think.
But there's supposed to be some theorems that have to do without. Well, okay, yeah. So I mean, there should be some old stuff that doesn't have to do with designs in particular. That some kind of statement of Traum theorem.
Yes, and it's usually phrased in terms of like torsion points on the elliptic curves or something.
Yeah. Anyway, I'd like to learn that, because my only old picture of the Jugendtraum had all this stuff about the J function in it, and you're sort of not. And I don't mind not talking about that, but I need to know like what some other story then. Yeah. I mean,
that's all going
to does fit in, but that's like another problem.
That's all going to tie in. That has to do with when you're dealing with non-principal ideals. But so far we're focusing on principal ideals, and the Gaussian integers only has principal ideals.
Okay. Yeah.
We're not seeing the fun stuff with the J invariant and non-principal ideals.
Okay.
Again, I'm just checking my notes here, trying to figure out where I'm supposed to quit. Let's see. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, again, it sounds to me like you were asking for, more abstract nonsense versions, meaning more conceptual versions of things that are going on here, as opposed to gritty calculations with examples and stuff like that. We want to get to that. Yeah, we really do want to get to that, but I guess we're just sort of short of time on that today, so we're not going to try to say anything about that today. But I guess I just want to say a couple of silly things before we quit here. Yeah, let me say a couple of silly things before we quit here. So again, I really like these designs. I like the fact that they really are, you know, I like Grothendieck's idea that, you know, they really are like children's drawings, that they're a thing that you can appreciate in a very childlike way, And you know, it's fascinating to me that we have this pair of designs. Do we have the pictures here again? This design and there's this design, and they just look different, but they're secretly the same thing. And I realized at some point that one of the things that this reminds me of, one of the really silly things that this reminds me of, is are you familiar with the Blink episode of Doctor Who?
Nope.
There are these evil statues that chase after people and threaten people, but it's a little bit tricky for the statues to accomplish this because, you know, statues don't move. So the way they do it is they only move when nobody's looking. And that reminds me of these designs. I mean, that's part of what bugs me about these designs. I mean, it's like these things, it's the same thing, but somehow it has changed its shape when I wasn't looking.
Well, you should put them both so they can show them both in the same frame. There's a moment there when you're not looking at them.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
So, you know, maybe I'll even say more about this later, but so when I checked the Doctor Who canon, I mean, they had some ridiculous story about that the reason these statues manage to change their shape when nobody's looking, and the reason they can't change their shape when anybody is looking, is because they're quantum locked or something, whatever that is.
I was hoping that they'd like bring in some bogus.
Sure.
Like,
well, did I really want that? I think I
there.
wanted that they hadn't done that. But yeah, but it's fun. Go ahead, yeah.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I didn't. I didn't know that they were that into quantum physics, but yeah. So that's Einstein was supposedly raising the question of whether the moon has a position and you're not looking at it.
All right, I'll have to think about that. I'll have to. Yeah, I mean, they you know, they.
So their wave packet spreads out, and then you like open your eyes, and then they're like in a new thing.
All right, so this also vaguely reminds me of the question of, can you hear the shape of a drum? You know, so sort of like, can you hear the shape of a design in some sense? Because when people first started to find that, you know, you couldn't hear the shape of a drum, they had very, you know, they wanted real examples that were real drums, but their first examples weren't genuine, you know, two-dimensional membranes in three-dimensional space. Their early examples had to do with like abelian varieties of some kind.
Yeah, they were exactly. Yeah, there are these fun lattices that are different, but when you mod out by them, you get isospectral tori. Yeah,
so I just have very extremely naive wonderings about, is there any relationship between, you know, the way that this design is secretly the same as this design? And again, it's all based on elliptic curves and abelian varieties. Is there any interesting mathematical relationship between, you know, that isospectral stuff about can you hear the shape of a drum and this whole Grothendieck-Teichmüller theory? So that's just an extremely naive question I have. And I just have one final comment before we quit, which is that, again, I've so far I've sort of been stuck, insofar as my concrete understanding of the calculations is concerned, I've been sort of stuck working with genus 0 examples. And again, that's why, you know, we're really talking about elliptic curves, but I have to make them look like they fit on a sphere instead of on tori. And so these genus zero examples, it's all about studying rational functions. So I had to learn more about the algebra of rational functions that I had known previously. And I learned, I knew that rational functions had numerators and denominators, but in studying this, basically because I had three colors or three branch points on the Riemann sphere, I had to start learning that rational functions have more than just numerator and denominator. They have these other things that I call the k-orators, like the one-orator, stuff like that. And that's really involved in, it's involved in the gritty calculations, but it's also involved somewhat in the conceptual thing about what's going on. But so far it only helps me with the genus zero case, because it's only in the genus zero case that these meromorphic functions are just rational functions from some Riemann sphere to some other Riemann sphere. But I just have one suspicion that I want to report about how this is going to generalize when we start doing more sophisticated stuff where we really can deal with higher genus instead of being stuck with genus zero. So there's something called a linear system of divisors. There's like some Wikipedia article about it or something like that. And I'm guessing that that's going to be the generalization I'm going to have to learn about when I deal with higher genus designs that live on a surface with the Riemann surface with many holes. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that vague idea. I'm kind of done now. Is there anything else I wanted to say about that? I mean, I've got this idea that a rational function, you can sort of think of it as its family of k-orators for all the different k's. And that's kind of how the fibers of this rational function vary. And it includes the numerator and the denominator, but has these other k-orators as well. But then you can have other ways for a family of k-orators, one for each k, to vary, and they don't end up giving you a genus zero thing. They give you a higher genus thing. And my vague suspicion is that that's going to have to do with this idea of linear system of divisors. So I need to learn that, but there's other reasons to learn that too, because I suspect it's related to other things that you and I have tried to understand in the past when we try to understand algebraic curves and how they're related to Hilbert spaces and stuff like that. If you might remember a discussion that you had with your friend Kim a long time ago about adjoint functors between Hilbert spaces and curves. I'm hoping that that's going to show up here, because the last time you asked me about this some decades ago, I wasn't able to give you any help with it. But I'm sort of hoping that that's, I'm not even sure that that is related to this linear system of divisors, but I think it might be related to this linear system of divisors. So that's something that I need to learn about. Is there something else I was going to say? Well, just this idea that a rational function is sort of made up of its k-orator. Yeah, okay. I guess the other thing I was going to say is that you have this family of k-orators of a rational function, and I talked about taking the moduli field of a design, and I only give a very vague idea of what the moduli field of a design. It's like the field of all the algebraic numbers that are hidden in the design. But if we try to make that more precise, then I think it's something like, you have the design, that's giving us a rational function with algebraic numbers as coefficients.
This is a genus zero design?
This is in this case, it's genus zero, but we certainly want to, generalize it, as I was saying, to the higher genus case. But in the genus zero case, we have the numerator and the denominator, and those have coefficients. We also have the k-orators, those have coefficients. So for any rational value of k, we get the coefficients of these k-orators. And those coefficients are algebraic numbers. And I think it's the field generated by all of those algebraic numbers. And that's my guess for a sort of gritty definition of what the moduli field is of a design. But we need to connect that to much more conceptual definitions of what's the moduli field of a design is. So sorry, I'm terribly disorganized as usual, but I sort of ran out of things to say. So thanks for listening.
Okie doke, I'll stop the recording.
Okay,